بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Iman live on Eman Channel. I'm your host Hisham. And today we'll be taking more of your questions, inshallah, pertaining to Islam. We are live in our London studio, so you can call us on 0203 515 0757. For those of you who are abroad and elsewhere, we have not forgotten. You can reach us on the WhatsApp number at the bottom of your screen. Alternatively, we are also streaming today on Facebook and YouTube, so you can comment your questions on the comments section below, respectively. Today we are joined by our Sheikh virtually, Sheikh Shams Duha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Sheikh. How are you? And how's your day been?
Alhamdulillah, fine.
Barakallahu feekum, Sheikh. Nice to have our Sheikh with us. For the brothers and sisters who may not be aware of Sheikh Shams Duha, he's actually the founder of both Ibrahim College and Mawarid Lifestyle, and he's doing lots of work for the Muslims in London and the surrounding areas. So, I wanted to begin, Sheikh, by asking, as we, are approaching the end of the year, I wanted to ask, although as Muslims we don't celebrate January the 1st, right? We don't celebrate New Year's per se, but what can we do when we reach the end of a year? And obviously we reach, the end of the year every year, right? So, can we use this time to reflect? Can we use this time to assess what worked, what didn't work? Or is this, how should a Muslim view this time, and what can we do and what should we not do, inshallah?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So, if we set aside the whole discussion about celebrating New Year's and just assume that we're not really celebrating anything, but this is just a milestone that is very much part of our thinking, of our consciousness, just because of the fact that the way in which we function and do our days and weeks and months, according to that system, January the 1st is a new year. Of course, we have another milestone that is more consistent with the way we do things as Muslims, which is the Islamic New Year. The thing is, neither of these have any religious significance in terms of celebration. However, they are both milestones, right? The passing of each Islamic New Year or each solar New Year is a milestone that makes us conscious of the fact that another year has passed. And as Muslims, we are people who are encouraged to do muhasabah of ourselves, to take account of ourselves. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu famously said, take account of yourselves before you are taken to account. Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu taqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad. O believers, have taqwa of Allah, and let each soul consider, see, reflect on. These are all the meanings of wal tanzur. So let each soul reflect on what he or she has sent forward for tomorrow, right? And therefore, this reflection is an ongoing thing. And whether or not this milestone is significant to you or me is going to depend on whether or not we do any muhasabah. And chances are you've done some. Perhaps it was a requirement at work as part of CPD. Perhaps it's to do with how your academic calendar is going, and January is a time when one evaluates, and so on. So muhasabah is something that we kind of do, and we do we evaluate in things that are important, right? Our managers evaluate us and evaluate our outcomes because of the fact that without their own their ability to effectively function a company's or an organization's work hinges upon their ability to evaluate the performance of those under them.
Yeah, like quarterly reviews, right?
Exactly, quarterly reviews and so on. So for us, if we're not evaluating how we're doing with our deen, how we're doing in our deen, how our worship has been this whole year, how how connected we are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether our outlook in life has moved further towards being dunya centered or has moved towards being more akhirah centered and so on. If we're not evaluating these things, then the concern here, whatever the milestone is, whether that milestone is January the 1st or whether it's 1st of Muharram or what have you, whatever the milestone might be, not evaluating is perhaps a sign that it's not important enough. And that's the thing that we have to be concerned about. I think all of us will agree, theoretically, intellectually, that yes, our deen is important, our akhirah is important, our iman is important, our ibadah is important. But if we're not evaluating it, then practically we are demonstrating with our actions that it isn't as important as the things that we do evaluate. Hence, its importance. So really, we should reflect back, see how this year has gone, but not evaluate it in terms of worldly goals. And this is what people don't do enough of. Very quickly, their evaluations move towards things that are worldly. And what we need to do is just, for once, take time out and say, no, I'm going to do an evaluation that's entirely to do with my akhirah, entirely to do with my worship, entirely to do with my taqwa, entirely to do with my relationship with Allah, entirely to do with my development, or the development of my akhlaq, but the part of it that I do purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that kind of evaluation is extremely important. Without it, we won't progress. And if everybody just looks back, it takes a moment, just look back on the year and ask yourself where you are, and I can do the same, where we are in that regard.
Sure.
I'll stop there, inshallah.
So given the importance, just a quick follow-up, given the importance, is it sufficient to do it every year, or should we do it maybe from Jum'ah to Jum'ah, or every... Well,
that's a practical thing. I would advise, and I try to help young people do this. I try to advise that people at least have something annually that they can refer their months and their weeks to. Does that make sense? So if a year is a big milestone, is a milestone that allows for a significant amount of variables, right? And that then needs to be broken down into months and weeks. And we do that anyway, right? We do that with a lot of things. We do that with our work, with our careers. We do that with our money, with our finances. We get monthly statements, from our banks and so on. These things happen. There's no reason why that kind of a structure wouldn't work when it comes to our spiritual objectives. The main thing is to set the objectives. And I always advise people that I mentor, I say, write them down so they serve as a reference. In this age of distractions, it's very difficult for people to keep their mind focused on a list that they've thought of from memory. So I always say, write down your objectives for the year so that you can refer to them regularly to see if you're on track. So my advice, if you want to do this, write.
Sure. And just to wrap up, Sheikh, before we approach our break and the callers and the questions we have, what are the top 3 actions or things that we should do or we should be reviewing every week or every month or every year?
Yeah, so these are going to sound really obvious, but I think we need some sort of evaluation of what is important in our life. And in purely kind of Islamic terms, this is an evaluation of our zuhud, right? Of what is the measure? Where on the spectrum are we in terms of being a worldly materialistic person and a person who whose focus is on the akhirah. And of course, our focus being on the akhirah means our focus is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. This is a significant question of worldview, because that frames a lot of things. People will make compromises based upon this issue, right? We will commit sins during the course of the year that will involve prioritizing dunya over akhirah. Right? We will commit those sins. And it will all boil down to that simple question of what is the most important thing to me? And therefore, I think that's one of the most important things. Figure out a way in which you're going to, perhaps if you do it, if you've done it last year, you found a way to say, okay, this is where I think I am at the moment, right?
Sure.
And I need to do more. Then this year you can measure it up against something. But if you haven't done that, then do it now. And then everything else, your salah and everything else kind of fits into that.
Yeah.
It sounds really, really obvious, but people don't do it.
Okay.
Because they don't do it, they don't have a reference.
Okay, inshallah. So we'll pick this up after the break, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. We'll be joining, you can join us after the break, inshallah. Keep us calling on 0203 515 0757. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, you're watching Ask Eman. Welcome back to our show that we started 15 or so minutes ago. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube today, and you can ask your questions there. You can also tweet us your question. For those of you who are abroad, you can reach us on the WhatsApp number at the bottom of your screen. And failing that, if you'd like to just call in, dial in, and speak to us live, then dial 0203 515 0757. If you missed the first segment, we are joined by our Sheikh Duha, who is here virtually, who's not with us here today live in person in London studio, but nonetheless he's here to take our questions. So, Sheikh, we'll start with the first question, inshallah. This is from YouTube, brother Sayyidur, who's asking, my friend keeps asking me whether I read the Quran or not, but I dodge a question because I don't want to expose my good deeds. But he keeps on asking this, what should I do? It's a bit of a sticky one.
Well, it's not that sticky. Bismillah. So it's completely a question of it's a matter of personal choice. There's you know, if you were to do it, and if it was with the intention of it, especially if you feel that he's asking you because you know, because he wants to take some motivation from what you're doing, compare himself to you, and try to keep up in a good way, then this is a good thing. And you know, we know that in some ahadith, Sahaba used to follow each other around to see what their good deeds are, to try to find out what's so good about them that they became worthy of the Prophet's praise, and so on. And the Quran tells us, "Fastabiqul khayrat," that, you know, compete with one another in good deeds. So if that's the intention that's coming across from your friend, then there's no harm in sharing the good that you do, or at least sharing part of it, or even in some vague way. But it is, you know, but it's also permissible for you not to. So it is really a question of personal choice. Try to gauge the reason why your friend is doing it. And if you feel that by sharing what you are doing with your friend, they might take some benefit, then, you know, with your intention checked, and constantly seeking Allah's assistance to make sure that it doesn't lead to riyah, then you may share it with him.
And riyah is showing off, right, Sheikh?
Riyah is showing off, yes.
Yeah.
But if you feel at risk from that, then be open with the brother and say, look, you know, I don't know if I can manage my intentions well, and I'm worried that it's going to lead to showing off and so on. So
sure. And I guess 2 points on this.
You can maybe say to him, do you mind if I'm a bit vague about it, or I'd rather not say. But I am, you know, you could say, you know what, I'd rather not go into details, but alhamdulillah, I am doing it regularly.
Yeah, I try my best. Yeah.
So I guess I try my best. You know, and so on. But it really depends on what's the reason. You know, sometimes some people come at the idea of competing with one another in good. Some people come at it from a very in a really unhealthy way. And these are all things that we have to kind of gauge.
Yeah. And Sheikh, just 2 points on that. I guess if everyone were to hide their deeds and we thought that's the right thing to do, then the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't have given us the example in the Sunnah, right? And the second point I wanted to quickly touch upon is, what do you do when you know people who are very inquisitive, and maybe out of innocence, but they are a bit too intrusive sometimes, or, you know, just people who just ask too many questions, but don't choose to share much about themselves. I remember I was speaking to a friend of mine a few years ago, and he asked me, Hisham, how are you going to change the world? So I said to him, you know, Fulan, in this case, Akhi, I said, inshallah, I intend to change myself, my family, my extended family, and then maybe the society. Inshallah, by that way, you know, and, you know, I'll change the world. So I asked him, so Akhi, how do you intend to change the world? And subhanAllah, he told me that that's between me and Allah. So how do you deal with individuals who ask questions but share nothing? What do you do about those sorts of people? How can we politely sort of tell them?
Yeah, so there's really nothing. There isn't much that you can do. It really depends on how much you can and can't say. It depends on your relationship. You know, some people some people, I can tell them bluntly to their face, knowing that they won't mind, because I have a relationship where they accept a degree of authority as an older brother, or as somebody who has some seniority over them, and so on. Other people they're strangers in that regard.
Yeah.
So I don't feel I'm in a position to say something to them that they might take offense from. Then the whole thing is counterproductive. So these are all matters of judgment, Brother Hisham, and we can't, we have to judge what our relationship with people, what the consequence of what we're about to say might be, and so on. And sometimes we can give nasiha, but I always say, whenever if you give nasiha with no consideration, and I share this a lot actually, I might have said it on the channel already before. If you give nasiha with no consideration to the result, then the nasiha is centered upon you, meaning the focus is on you doing your duty. However, a more effective way to give nasiha is, I would say, part of the meaning of calling unto Allah with wisdom and good counsel is to give nasiha in a manner that is centered upon the person that you are trying to give nasiha to. Because if that's not your concern, then you're not trying. Then you don't give nasiha. If you're not concerned about wanting the best outcome for the person in front of you who you're offering the nasiha to, if that's not paramount in your mind, then you're not offering nasiha. You're doing something else.
Right.
Does that make sense? So sometimes what people do, and this is a very, very commonly observed habit, people feel, I have to do my bit, I have to do my duty, and they have no consideration for the outcome. And it's exactly in that situation that people end up doing more harm. That's called calling unto Allah without wisdom.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it more like calling to yourself?
Yeah, it's a kind of selfish discharging of duty. I'm going to do my duty. To hell with what happens to the other person.
Sure.
I'm going to tell that person to his face. And then people then quote things like, say the truth, even if it is bitter, or the best jihad is saying the truth in front of a tyrant, and so on. But the person in front of you that you're trying to give nasiha to isn't a tyrant.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not Musa
and sometimes and it, the thing is, your harshness is the bitterness that they're going to taste. They're not going to taste, it's not going to be bitter because they've realized the truth. It's going to be bitter because you've been bitter.
Sure.
Do you understand the difference? So these kind of things are actually really important, and often we don't have to break these things down because it's common sense. But you know what? Just look around in masjids and the way brothers behave to one another, and you realize it's not so common sense actually, because people are constantly in other people's faces offering nasiha where it's just not effective. So, I picked this up from education. This is educational language, basically. This idea of pupil-centered learning. Or people-centered teaching strategies and teacher-centered teaching strategies. Teacher-centered teaching strategies, teacher stands there, gives his lecture. And if he's done that, he's done his job, he's delivered his lesson plan. Whereas people-centered teaching strategies are concerned with bringing out a result for the benefit of the student. And it's measured against that. It's not measured against whether the teacher's done his job or not.
Yeah, sure.
Makes sense. And the same thing applies with da'wah and with nasiha and things like that. Think about the outcome for the benefit of the person that you're offering the nasiha to. And that works, I think.
Sure. Jazakallah khairan for clearing that up. Our next question, Sheikh, is brother or sister asking, if I've missed previous zakat, can I wait until the following year to pay it back? And we have around 2 minutes left, inshallah.
If you've missed it, you can. I mean, zakat can be delayed. But one of the things that you can do is, the brother or sister didn't explain why it was delayed, but assuming you have a good reason for delaying it, perhaps you qualify to pay the zakat, but the cash isn't available to hand. One of the things that you should do is set that money aside. So, and the way you do that is you account for it. Does that make sense? So if, for example, in 2020, you had £500 worth of zakat due, but you don't have £500 in cash spare to donate, then you account for it and set it aside. Another reason why sometimes people set it aside is because they anticipate £1,000 worth of zakat giving to somebody for a particular reason, and they want to save it up for that purpose, person or for that cause, that's also permissible. But the fuqaha say that you should set the, if you have the money, you should set the money aside. Set it aside, don't use it, and that will go down as you having as a legitimate way to defer zakat to a later date.
Sure. And does that still count as zakat, or does that now become sadaqah, or does it change?
It's still zakat.
Still zakat. Okay.
It's still zakat. Yeah. It's always been zakat, and it will be zakat in the future, as long as it's clear and you've accounted for the fact that you're paying in Ramadan 2021, you're paying the zakat of Ramadan 2020. So there's a bit of advanced thinking that basically has to go into this.
Yeah. But obviously you shouldn't be delaying zakat if you have the means to pay and you're able to pay it, right?
Are available to you, there's people that you can give the zakat to, you have the money available, then you've got no reason to delay it. Sure. So that's why I said that I'm assuming that the brother or sister who's asking the question had a reason to delay. If you have a reason to delay, then it is something that the fuqaha have spoken about and have allowed it. But one of two things you have to do. You don't have the money, you should account for it. If you have the money, you should set the money aside.
Okay. Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh. We are approaching our break. My dear brothers and sisters, keep calling in on 0203 515 0757. We are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. Reach us there. We'll see you in the next couple of minutes. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My dear brothers and sisters, you're watching Ask Eman live on Eman Channel. We've just finished our first two segments of the day, so we're halfway through the show. And our show, my dear brothers and sisters, for those of you who haven't watched before, is a live and interactive Q&A show designed to connect you with people of knowledge so that you may ask questions to sharpen, to revise, and to even learn something new. So you can call us on 0203 515 0757. Alternatively, you can reach us on our social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube, and we're streaming live there. And if you are a keen Twitter handle person, then you can also tweet your question to us, inshallah. We are joined by our Sheikh Shamsul Duha, who's alhamdulillah been answering all of our questions in detail. So keep calling in, even if you're abroad or overseas. You can reach us on our international number, which should be displayed at the bottom of your screen there. So Sheikh, the first question we have is from our young sisters in Switzerland, Amina and Maryam. And they're asking, after what is the correct time to pray witr? Is it after Isha or after Tahajjud? So please answer this for us. Jazakumullah khair.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Both times are correct. If a person, so first of all, both times are correct.
Sure.
And then there's some guidance around what's preferred depending on your tahajjud habits. So if, for example, you regularly wake up for tahajjud and it's a secure habit. It's not something that you sometimes are able to do, sometimes you don't, sometimes you hear the alarm, sometimes you don't hear the alarm, then you don't do what I'm recommending. However, if you have a regular habit of qiyamul layl, of tahajjud, then it is better to make your witr the last prayer of the night, meaning to pray your witr after tahajjud. However, if your tahajjud isn't a secure habit, isn't something that, you know, when you set your alarm, you're certain of that you're going to wake up, or at least fairly certain that you're going to wake up. If the habit's not like that, it's like if I'm up, I do it. If not, then no. Then you should pray your witr after your Isha, and not delay it in case you miss it, in case you sleep through it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
yeah,
times are valid. It's preferred to do it late if you have a secure tahajjud habit.
Okay, so a few points on this. So how important is witr? And also how do you pray witr? Is it 1? Is it 3? Is it other than that? And
yeah, so
do you need to sleep?
Yeah, so there's in terms of the number of rakat and how we perform witr, there's quite a lot of different opinions. But in terms of how important it is, the fuqaha disagree in two camps. So Imam Hanifa and the Hanafi school say witr is wajib because it is articulated with a clear command, and therefore in the hadith, and therefore witr is wajib. And this is generally what tends to happen with the Hanafi madhab when something isn't as strong evidentially to be deemed a fard, but it seems to be more emphatic than a sunnah, and they usually regard it as a wajib. For the rest of the fuqaha, the other three madhabs, the wajib category is fard. There is no wajib that sits in between fard and sunnah. So for them, it's an emphasized sunnah. It's a sunnah mu'akkada. So as such, it's important according to everyone. Does that make sense? So what I would caution everyone is, don't think of it as, you know, even if you don't follow the Hanafi madhab and you follow the view that it's a sunnah mu'akkada, remember that it's an emphasized sunnah according to the other fuqaha. And yes, other fuqaha also recognize sunnah mu'akkada as in an emphasized sunnah. And therefore, it's one of the most, like the most emphasized sunan, according generally, if we set the Hanafi madhab aside, is going to be the witr and the 2 rakats of fajr, right? And they shouldn't be missed unless somebody has, a reason, right? And in the Hanafi madhab, fajr remains the most important sunnah among the sunnah mu'akkadas, but witr is wajib and must be performed. And not only performed, if a person misses it, they have to make up for it. That makes sense?
Yeah. So if that really confused any of our brothers and sisters, you can reach us on 0203 515 0757 to clarify. We have our next question, inshallah, Sheikh. It's from YouTube. And Sister Marwa is asking, what is the maximum age children can share a bed with their parents? And what age can two sisters or two brothers or a sister and brother can share a room? Inshallah.
There isn't a hard and fast rule. Generally, some of the hadith, there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, the famous hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ says, command your children to pray at the age of 7, and then discipline them for not praying at the age of 10. In that hadith, in some of the narrations, it finishes off. The hadith finishes off with and separate their beds. So therefore, a general kind of recommendation would be that they should be separated at the age of 10 from each other and from parents. If nowadays children don't sleep with their parents for so long. If they do, then it's either there's only one parent or there's some issues with mummy and daddy's relationship if that's happening. But so that generally doesn't happen. But siblings sometimes do share beds. If they do, it shouldn't go past 10. That's a general advice, or I would say that would be the Sunnah guidance. But really, preferably, it should begin earlier and it should happen earlier. I suppose the only exception would be people who are overcrowded and so on, in which case, 10. Try your best to separate them at 10. Perhaps switch to a bunk bed or something like that, and then if not, then if they struggle with that, then as soon as possible afterwards start to wean them off. But it shouldn't go beyond 10.
Sure. And speaking on the topic of sleep, I think a lot of us in the UK working long hours or having families, etc., they sort of tend to be a bit of sleep deprived, right? So what's the guidance given to us on sleep? The importance, how much should we sleep? Should we sleep less? Should we sleep more? Obviously, the people of the past, the righteous, slept very little. What can we do in today's day and age in terms of the actual topic of sleep? I think it's quite important to hear from our Sheikh.
A smart way to do this. There's no categoric number, right?
Yeah.
According to the Sunnah and so on.
And Sheikh, is one more pious if they sleep less? Is that a misconception?
Depends on why they do. If you're not more pious if you sleep less if you're up watching Netflix, obviously. But if it's a question of what you do with that time. If a person sleeps less because they want to maximize their ibadah, of course they're more pious. Sure. But not sleeping less for the sake of sleeping less isn't a good idea, because it does physically harm you. Sometimes, like I've seen some of my teachers sleep very little and make do, and I remember we used to think, I could never do that. There has to be something spiritual about that. Yeah. And take that out of the equation. Yeah. And what you're left with is just human experience, science, medical advice, which tells you if you're sleeping a really a low amount, anything below 7 hours, you're going to struggle, right? Yep. Or your body's going to want some catch-up sleep at some point. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ, if he slept less during the night, and you'll see this with a lot of salihin, they may sleep less during the night, but they tend to make up a little bit for it by taking a nap during the day. Yeah, like after Dhuhr, right? After Dhuhr, yeah. And if you're not doing that, then you will suffer. So sleep a healthy amount, whatever your body needs in order to be rested. It's not a virtue in and of itself to sleep less. Sure. Right? The reduction of sleep is because the Salihin want to maximize worship at night. And then often what they will do is if they do develop a good worship habit at night, they'll make up for their sleep by sleeping during the day. Sure. Okay, perfect. Jazakumullah khairan. So we have a caller waiting, but before we go to the caller, just to advise our dear brothers and sisters, and for our viewers, if you are suffering from a lack of sleep or any other physical ailment, then do contact your doctor and your GP and our wonderful health system, which is the NHS. So we have inshallah, our brother Shahid on the phone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Where are you calling from, brother? And what is your question for our Sheikh?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm calling from Brighton.
Sorry, can you speak a little bit louder, brother? We can't hear you so well.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair
Alaikum
for taking me to ask me the question.
Sure.
The question to Sheikh is first one about zakat.
Sure.
Sheikh says you can put money aside to do zakat, to make up for an amount, to give it to somebody to do a specific amount. My understanding is zakat should be given to the 8 categories of people, and they should be make the owner of the money, and what they do with the money is up to them. We shouldn't have no specific say or direction than what should be doing. Am I having a wrong understanding? That's the first one. The second one is he said,
brother, can we just hold you for the second question, inshallah? We're approaching our break, so we'll take you thereafter if you can hold the line. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, jazakumullah khairah. So, my dear brothers and sisters, we've reached the ending of this segment, and we have one more part for us, inshallah, today. So, you can keep calling us on 02035150757. And as we mentioned before, we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back after the break. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, you're watching Ask Eman. For our final segment today, we are joined by our Sheikh, Sheikh Shamsul Duha. He's here virtually, he's not here with us, but he is here to take and answer all of your questions, inshallah. You can reach us on 0203-515-0757. We are active and streaming live on our social media handles. You can also like, comment, and subscribe. So we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube today. You can also tweet your questions if you wish to do so. So before the break, Sheikh, we had Brother Shahid. I think he's still with us, and he had a couple of questions. The first of which was pertaining to Zakah. Let's just see if we have our brother with us here today. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Shahid. Are you still with us?
Yes, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, I'm still here. I
Alhamdulillah,
wanted to ask you, the Sheikh, how we make up for the witr if you miss it. If you wake up, just say Fajr time, do you do your 3 witr at that time and do your Fajr afterward, or do you do your witr daytime and do, instead of 3, do 4? This is what I have been taught when I was a young man. Now I'm an old man. I find it sometimes difficult getting up. So I am thinking if I am doing it wrong or if I am doing too much sin, that Allah doesn't want me to do it anymore. So what would be Sheikh's advice to an old man regarding this?
May Allah bless you with a long and healthy life, Brother Shahid. If you're still there, right? Can you still hear me?
I am still, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you briefly summarize your first question so we can remind our Sheikh?
I got the
The
first
first question was,
Got it?
my understanding is when you are giving zakat, you are giving it away to the 8 categories of people mentioned in Surah At-Tawbah. I think it's at number 60, that there are 8 categories of people you give it to. So you give it to them, the money, whatever zakat is, and they become the owner of the money and they do whatever they wanted to do with the money. We should not be directing them what to do with the money. That's my understanding.
Right. Okay. Sure.
Is it
Got
a right understanding or wrong understanding? That's what I want to figure out.
Perfect. Jazakallah khairah, brother. May Allah bless you and your family, and Jazakallah khairah for calling us. Sheikh.
Barakallah fiqh. So the question that we answered earlier and the question that the brother is asking now, these are 2 separate questions, right? So the brother is absolutely right. This is actually an agreed upon condition. And I'm glad he brought it up because there's a lot of bad practices when it comes to this condition, this particular condition. And that condition is that when we give zakat to someone, something we call in Arabic, tamlik has to be involved, meaning the money has to be handed over to there has to be transfer of ownership with all of the trappings that go with that, transfer of ownership. So if you're giving somebody zakat in the form of money, that money has to become their ownership. Part of that, the implication of that is they should be able to do what they want with it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So therefore, zakat cannot be handed over to somebody and on conditions that they can't waver from. Right? I mean, you can say, here you go, you wanted some help to build your house. I'm going to give you some, inshallah, use it to build your house. But then we can have no say if the brother or sister goes ahead and spends it on something else, right? The tamlik has to, you have to wholeheartedly make transfer of ownership. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, this has certain practical implications. So, for example, if you build a house for somebody, then you have to be really careful to ask yourself, at what point is transfer of ownership happening? Does that make sense? So these are all things that have to be managed. So this is absolutely correct. The question we were answering before was to do with advanced payment, provided that there's a reason for it. Right. So, for example, if somebody says to you, would you please give me some zakah next year? I need quite a large amount of money next year. I'm thinking about building my house, etc., and we can't afford it. And so on, or we're in debt and the debt is becoming due next year, and in 2 years' time, and somebody that's close to you, and you want to help them in a substantial way, and your zakah each year is about £400-500, and you want to hold on to it. If you give it to them now, they don't need it now, or maybe they're not even eligible now.
Yeah.
right? They become eligible then, or you're worried that the money might get used up in a different way. You can set the zakat aside so that you make a substantial contribution to them the year after, and that's permissible. But however, when you do give it, tamlik will happen. You will make transfer of ownership, right? And you will have no say on what they do with it. If they end up spending it on something else, that is entirely their prerogative. So my point is they're two separate issues. Okay, inshallah. Yeah. Oh, and the second question about witr, the best thing to do is, like I said, if you struggle, if you're uncertain about making it for witr before Fajr time enters, then you should pray witr before you go to sleep. That is my advice. People who delay witr until the end of the night, that is the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged it. However, you should only do it if you know that, or normally, for example, your normal practice is you get up for tahajjud, you have no issues, and that you rarely, if ever, miss it, or don't wake up or something like that. Then pray at the end of the night after your tahajjud. Otherwise, pray it before. Doing the witr, performing the witr is more important than performing it in its ideal time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And how you prioritize depends on your habit, depends on how disciplined you are when it comes to waking up. Okay, so my advice is, it sounded like there was some struggle there. Pray after Isha, and then do your tahajjud, inshallah. You'll get the full reward for both. There's a bonus on top if you perform it according to Sunnah right at the end. But in order to attain that bonus, we can't risk it altogether. Does that make sense?
So Sheikh, just quickly on that point, what about the hadith of the Prophet where he says that the one who performs Isha and Fajr in the masjid has a reward as if he prayed the entire night? Now, is that affected if you don't pray witr, or do we not know? And it's just a case of Allah knows best.
Witr would be separate to that. Witr is definitely separate to Isha.
Yeah.
The way the sunnah of Fajr is separate to Fajr.
Right.
The way the sunnah and nawafil before the after Isha are separate to Isha. In the same way, witr is separate, but it's conditional to being performed after Isha. It has to be done after Isha, otherwise it's not valid. So those are the conditions. Now, so therefore, inshallah, a person will be rewarded for performing the two, for worshipping the whole night if they perform both of them in jama'ah. But they will also lose out if they don't do their witr.
That's true.
Two things will go together.
And on Brother Shahid's first question, I had a question just to follow up. What about the case of giving charity? It can be zakat, it can be sadaqah. Maybe our Sheikh can answer on both accounts. What about people who may spend all their money on, let's say, gambling or alcohol or cigarettes or whatever it may be? So do we then give them zakah? Do we then give them sadaqah? How do we? What's the ruling on this?
I mean, people should be discerning when they give charity. I mean,
discerning,
when we give charity, whether it's discerning, meaning that we should apply some judgment. If you know 100%, that a person is going to waste away the money on heroin, your zakat. The thing is, your zakat is going to be done, but you haven't helped the person. Do you understand? So these are, I spoke before about judgment, right?
Yeah.
We have to apply this kind of judgment. So perhaps this person, don't get the very specific and technical nature of zakat caught up with this person. Perhaps, use your sadaqah to assist this person in a more systematic way. Perhaps use your sadaqah to get them into a rehab center, right? Or get them into some sort of program that's going to get them off the drugs, and then sort of assist them to get them back on their feet as they come off the drugs and come back fully into their senses and so on. And the way you manage or administrate that kind of giving may not work with zakah. So therefore, give your zakah somewhere else, use sadaqah here.
But what if sadaqah is the same situation where you can only help them financially because you have let's say they're abroad, right? And you send money because you can't send aid per se, but then you fear that that money just going to be wasted, right? So
use tawkeel. Use tawkeel. Have somebody else abroad who's trustworthy act on your behalf. So you hand the money over to that person to then support this person with the management of all of these risk factors. Does that make sense? And that's very common. A lot of people do this, right? You got relatives, you don't know what they're going to do with the money and so on and so forth. So you have another relative who's senior, and we do that, right? And you hand the money over to them and you say, here's X amount of money, but I want you to give it to so and so in 10 installments. Right? Or or just make sure that they use it wisely and they're close to them, and so they can keep an eye on them, and therefore they also share in the reward.
Okay. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. We've reached the ending of our show today. Ahsanallahu alaikum. It was a pleasure having our Sheikh with us. Sadly, you couldn't be with us here live, but inshallah, maybe next time. Brothers and sisters, Jazakallah khair for tuning in and asking your questions. We pray that it's been beneficial for you as much as it's been beneficial for us. Inshallah, join us next time later on this week on Eman Channel. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.